So, verse 3. In all actions I will examine my mind, and the moment a disturbing attitude arises, endangering myself and others, I will firmly confront and avert it. So that is our daily practice, okay? Some of the other verses, they talk about specific situations. Somebody offends you, somebody betrays your trust, something like that. This verse is for all situations. Yeah, it doesn't matter if people treat you nicely or people don't treat you nicely. Afflictions can arise in either case. Sometimes we think that when people treat us nicely, then because there's no anger, we think, okay, my mind is free of afflictions. Wrong. Because sometimes what it comes instead is attachment. We're attached to reputation, to praise, to being important, or arrogance may come, something like that. So we have to be just as vigilant in checking for afflictions when we're happy as when we're unhappy. Yeah, and this was a difference in the Mind and Life conferences when scientists were asked between positive and negative emotions. They made the difference on if you feel good, then it's, that's a positive mental state. And if you feel unhappy, that's a negative mental state. But from the Buddhist perspective, that's not so. Because, like I just said, you could feel happy and have afflictions all over the place, and that makes it difficult to recognize them because you feel good. So you think, there's nothing to look at. And we also, usually think, oh, if I feel lousy, then an affliction is present. And it came up in those discussions. His Holiness pointed out that, for example, if you're meditating on the defects of cyclic existence, your mind might get quite sober. Not this giddy excitement, I'm so happy, but really kind of, and that isn't something we would call a happy state of mind, but it's a very virtuous state of mind. Okay, so just because our mind feels sober and we're not just bubbling over with joy, doesn't mean that there's non-virtue. It could mean that it's a certain kind of virtuous mind. Yeah. Sometimes even when we have compassion for others, again, our mind may not be bubbling over with excitement, but or even happy or whatever. But it's still quite a virtuous state of mind. So we have to learn to discriminate virtue and non-virtue in a way that's quite different than happy and unhappy. And what many people, would say are virtuous and non-virtuous states of mind. Yeah, because, for example, in therapy, the purpose is so that you can adjust to and act in a reasonable way and a content way in your interactions with other people. That may be one of the purposes of therapy. Yeah, and you may accomplish that purpose, but you may have attachment, come up in the process of it, because what therapy is trying to do is it assumes that the afflictions are normal and that we're going to have them, and it just tries to balance them so you don't get so carried away that you make a lot of problems for yourself and you're tremendously unhappy. Okay, so what I'm getting at is in Buddhism, we have specific standards that are quite different, standards for virtue and non-virtue that may be quite different than what we've grown up with, either in our family, in therapeutic situations, or even in other religions. And I remember an example of the last one. Were you with us when we went to see the Catholic nuns when we lived in France? Yeah, there was a group of Catholic nuns that we would go to visit. Sometimes we stayed overnight there. And I remember one time we were eating a meal, and there was some kind of spider or something that crawled around. And one of the sisters just, grabbed her shoe and went wonk. While the Buddhist nuns were going, don't do that. Yeah. And she was so surprised by our reaction, and so that led to a big discussion about, well, why do we consider it non-virtuous to kill insects? For them, it's very good because, insects carry disease and they bother you and they bite you and so on and so forth. Okay, so in this verse here, where it's asking us to always examine our mind, we're looking to discern virtue and non-virtue. Yeah, so we really have to understand what those two are from a Buddhist viewpoint, not from the viewpoint of the religion we grew up with, or our therapist, or our friends, or general society. Okay, so that's, there's a lot to say on this verse. I'll keep on it for a while, but I think that's one major point to really think about. And to get an idea of how to differentiate virtue and non-virtue, that's where studying the scriptures is really, helpful. So at the beginning of Precious Garland, the first chapter, Nagarjuna talks about 16 practices to do, and so 10 were to abandon the 10 non-virtues. Do you think we can remember the other 3 to abandon and the other 3 to practice? I remember one was to abandon intoxicants, to abandon harming others. Does anybody remember the third one? Huh? Wrong livelihood, that's it. Okay. And then on the 3 others to practice, one was generosity, one was respecting those worthy of respect, and the other was love, right? Yeah. Good. So together it's good there's many of us, because that way together we can remember something. Okay, so you remember those, and then that helps you to discern virtue and non-virtue. When you read, the Good Karma book and the root text there by Dhammarakshita, The Wheel of Sharp Weapons, that also teaches you a lot about karma. What are the causes of especially the causes of non-virtue, what we've done. And then you can tell, well, if you abandon those, then that's virtue. And if you do their opposite, it's virtue too. So very helpful to do these kinds of studies. Also, there's the Sutra of the Wise and the Foolish. Yeah. There's, when we study about refuge and to do the refuge nundro, or even in taking refuge in our daily practice, there's the explanation about negativities that we create in relationship to the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and to our spiritual teacher. And so it's very helpful to study those things too. Yeah. In the 35 Buddhas, it mentions some of the things to abandon. Okay, so there's a lot of places where we can get information about this, and then to really think about it so we can identify virtue and non-virtue in our own experience. So that's the start, to be continued.